Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, good morning. In today's video, we are going to look at the hormonal regulation. So, hormonal regulation is one of the vital processes that are taking place in our body, and it involves hormones regulating physiological functions. So, when we say physiological functions, it means how our body work. So, with the hormones play a lot of biological roles in maintaining the functions of our body. So at this point, we are actually going to look at how hormones play a crucial roles in maintaining homeostasis, that is the control of the internal environment, the growth of the living organism, the metabolism of the organisms, as well as the reproduction. So therefore, understanding hormonal coordination can help in grasping how various systems in the body interact. So now, what are hormones? Hormones are chemical messengers produced by glands in the endocrine system. They travel through the bloodstream to target organs, eliciting specific response. So generally what happens in the case of these hormones, they are like a chemical messengers and they are produced by various glands. Some of this gland can be thyroid gland, can be parathyroid gland, can be pancreas, it can be pituitary gland, and it can be adrenal gland. So these are the glands that usually produce these hormones. And more importantly, hormones that don't elicit functions where they are produced. They usually travels through a blood to their target organs and then elicit their specific response. So if they are produced in the adrenal gland, they are not going to work at the adrenal gland. Rather, bloodstream would be used as a medium to transport the hormones from where they are produced to the target organs where they are going to elicit their specific response. And these hormones can affect processes. Hormones can affect various processes. And so some of these processes that can be affected by the hormones includes the moods. Sometimes we find ourselves in good mood and sometimes we find ourselves in a bad mood. And that is actually controlled by the hormones. And also the metabolism, that is the sum total of all biochemical reactions that are taking place in our body. There are millions of reactions that are taking place in our body every day. So that metabolism or that sum of the reactions that are taking place in our body is controlled by the hormones. The immune functions. Immune function is actually a system that trying to protect the body against any foreign organism. That is anything that can cause disease in a living organism. So it's actually the work of the immune system to fight those pathogenic agents and actually eliminate them from the body. So this is actually what we call hormones. So they are chemical messengers and they actually carry out their functions to their specific target organs and they are not actually elicit their functions or they don't elicit their specific response at exact locations where they are produced. Rather, it travels through the bloodstream to the specific target organs. And then that is actually for the hormones. So what is endocrine system? An endocrine system is a network of glands that produce and secrete hormones. So it's actually the endocrine system. It is actually a network of glands that produce and secrete the hormones. So that's what you call endocrine system. It is actually networks. It connected with different glands that produce and secrete hormones. The key glands that are actually involved in producing hormones, the key of them, we have pituitary gland. As we can see, number one, we have pituitary gland. We have thyroid gland. We have adrenal gland. We have pancreas. These are some of the major glands that are actually produced in our body. And each of these glands has a specific function and regulate different bodily processes. Like, for example, let's look at some of the actually glands that we have in our body and some of the hormones that are actually secreted by the gland. Look at it, number one. we have thyroid glands. As we can see, we have thyroid gland. Thyroid gland produces a hormone or produces thyroxine. So thyroxine is a hormone. So it's produced by a thyroid gland. We have pancreas. Pancreas produce hormones. It produces insulin. It produces glucagon. It produces also somatotropin. So this is actually some of the gland and the hormones they produce. We also have pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is called master gland, and it's made up of two components. We have two types of pituitary gland. We have anterior pituitary gland. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget that we have anterior pituitary gland and we have posterior pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary gland produces some specific class of hormones. So let me write them. The anterior pituitary gland, the anterior pituitary gland, and as we can see, the anterior pituitary gland, it produces some classes of hormones. Some of these hormones that are produced by the posterior pituitary gland, we have FSH. What is the full meaning of FSH? It's called follicle stimulating hormones. Follicle stimulating hormones. So it's one of the hormones produced by the pituitary gland. And then apart from this, it also produces LH, luteinizing hormones. We have luteinizing hormones, follicle stimulating hormones. We have luteinizing hormones. It also produces another hormones called prolactin. Prolactin. A prolactin is a hormone that used for feeding the babies. It's a hormone that found in milk and is important in feeding babies. And then we also have ACH. We have ACH. ACTH. There's also another hormones, adrenal corticotropic hormones. So this is actually some of the hormones that are produced by the anterior pituitary gland, and you should not forget about them. Then apart from the anterior pituitary gland, the posterior pituitary gland, this is anterior. So the posterior pituitary gland also produce another class of hormones, and these hormones that are produced by the posterior pituitary gland, it secretes growth hormones, oxytocin, and ADH. Posterior pituitary gland produces growth hormones. It produces growth hormones. Number one, it produces growth hormones. And it also produces oxytocin. It also produces oxytocin. And apart from oxytocin produced by posterior pituitary gland, it also produces ADH. That is antidiuretic hormones. So these are the three hormones produced by posterior pituitary gland. And then we also have another gland called adrenal gland, and it produces adrenaline. We have ovaries in the case of females where they actually produces estrogen. But in the case of males, we have testes, that is where they produce testosterone. So ladies and gentlemen, this is just actually a general brief introductions of the nerve of the endocrine system. So endocrine system is actually a network of glands that produces and secrete hormones. And this is actually some of the endocrine system. It includes glands like thyroid gland, pituitary gland, adrenal gland, pancreas, testes, and ovaries. And also each of these glands, they have a specific types of hormones they produce. So then, ladies and gentlemen, very interestingly, we should know that it is not only, these hormones is not only found in vertebra, it's also found in the invertebrate. Invertebrate also have these hormones. But very importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we should know that in the invertebrate, they don't have endocrine glands. So that is the first thing that you should not forget about the invertebral hormones. Number one, they don't have endocrine glands. So that is number one. But very importantly, they can also undergo neurosecretions and are the only hormonal coordination. or they don't have gland, but they can undergo neurosecretions, which is actually the only hormonal coordinators. So it means that, ladies and gentlemen, among the single-cell animal-like organisms, specific messengers or specific chemical messengers released by cells can carry out information very rapidly by diffusion over a small substances or over a small distances. So it means that they don't have endocrine gland, but they have hormone, they have cells that release such classes of molecules that can travel a small distance to carry out their coordination. Like, for example, in the multicellular hydra, a hydra, which is one of the examples of endocrine organisms, they have what we call neurosecretory cells, which located at the nerve nets of the hypostome produces a neurosecretion that controls growth, regeneration, and the development of sexuality. So this is to understand that, ladies and gentlemen, the hydra is one of the examples of invertebrate, and they have what we call neurosecretory cells. These neurosecretory cells of these invertebrate organisms, it actually located at the nerve needs of the hyposome, and it releases the chemicals that can promote growth, regeneration, and sexuality. So this is actually some of the chemical hormones and their functions produced by the invertebrate. Like, for example, look at annelids, especially uh, examples where we have foliates. They are the examples of the annelids that also produce hormones, and the hormones produced by these organisms is called feedback substance, and the source of these hormones is from submature oocysts of the foliates. And very importantly, the functions of these feedback substances produced by the annelida is actually important for their growth, regeneration, and asexual reproduction, as well as the maturation of the gonads. They are all controlled by the neurosecretion. So the neurosecretion, that is the neurosecretory cells of the annelida, they produces a feedback substance, which is actually like a hormones and travel a small distance, which is the foliates in growth, development, sexual reproduction, as well as the maturation of the gonad cells. So this is actually the functions of this. Then we also have mollusks. Mollusks also, like gastropoods, they produce a hormones called gonadotropic hormones, or or it produces schistosamine. So this is actually some of the chemicals that can be produced by the mollusk. And of course, we have the sources is dorsal bodies, brain, hematocysts, gonads. All this can be produced from there. And then we have cephalopod, where we have gonadotropic hormones, which produced by the optics gland. So this is actually some of them. And in addition, we also have in the case of arthropods, arthropod also produces hormones, and some of the hormones are actually very important in the control of the metamorphosis of the insects. Like, for example, one of the hormones produced by this arthropod, especially insects, they produce what we call thoracotropic hormone. Thoracotropic hormones. I think I need to write it. I need to write it because it is not here. Thora. We have thoracotropic. Thoracotropic. This is the name. Thoracotropic hormones. This thoracotropic hormones is actually produced from cerebral neurosecretory cells, and it is being released into the bloodstream from the porphyro cardiaca, which stimulates the thorax gland to produce ecdysone. So it means that it is actually a hormones produced that stimulates the thorax gland of the insect to produce ecdysone. What is ecdysone? Ecdysone is also a hormone, and the major functions of this ecdysone is stimulate the epithelial cells to begin the process which lead to ecdysis or molting. So you see, ecdysteroids is like the ecdysone hormones, and the major functions of this ecdysteroid hormones is for molting, that is ecdysis, the shedding of the skin by insects. And then apart from that, there is also another hormones called juvenile hormones. Juvenile hormones in the insect. You see the juvenile hormones, the major functions of these juvenile hormones is to ensure that there is a proper development of the next larval stage. So remember, insects have different larval stages. So it is actually the work of these juvenile hormones to make sure that there is a proper development of the next larval stage of the mosquito. So these are actually some of the important things that you should know about the invertebrate. They have hormones, but they lack endocrine gland or endocrine systems, and they have what you call neurosecretory cells, which help them to secrete and produce the hormones. And then the hormones can also travel through a small distance to their target organs where they carry out their physiological role. So then now let's look at the types of hormones. So ladies and gentlemen, generally we have two types of hormones. We have steroid hormones and the peptide hormones. So steroid hormones, they are actually a lipid-soluble hormones. So they are lipid solubles, allowing them to easily pass through the cell membrane. So because the steroid hormones, they can easily pass through the cell membrane, so that is why most of them, they don't require receptor. So as a lipid, the steroid hormones can cross directly through the cell membrane and bind to receptor proteins in the cytoplasm. So rather, in the case of these steroid hormones, they don't need receptor on the surface of the cell. Rather, they can directly get across the cell membrane and then bind to the receptor proteins in the cytoplasm or inside the nucleus of the target cells. So it means that the hormones can bind to the cytoplasm or combine to the receptors in the cytoplasm or the nucleus of the cell because they can easily cross the cell membrane. So together they form a hormone receptor complex. So when the hormones, the steroid hormones bind with the receptor, then they will find what you call, or they will form what you call hormone receptor complex, which serve as a transcription factors promoting or inhibiting transcription and translation of the genes. So the major functions of these steroid hormones, when they bind with the receptors, they form a complex, and the complex has a lot of roles, especially it can serve as a transcription factor, which can promote or inhibit transcription, translation. What is transcription? Transcription is actually when you have a DNA converted to RNA. So the process that involves the conversion of DNA to RNA is called transcription, while the conversion of RNA to protein, is called translation. So this hormone receptor complex in the case of steroid hormones can either inhibit or promote transcription and translation. So in the case of peptide hormones, because they are water soluble and bind to receptor on the surface to exert their effects. So they only bind to the receptor on the surface of the cells because they cannot cross the cell membrane due to their water solubility for them to carry out or for them to exert their effects. So then the next thing is now the mechanisms of hormonal action. So the mechanisms of hormonal actions, hormones exert their effect via specific receptors located on the target cell. So the binding of hormones to receptors triggers a series of biochemical reactions inside the cell. Like for example, now, if you can see clearly, this is a hormones and this is the receptor. So you see the hormones now bind to the receptor because from here you can see that this is the surface of the cell. So as a result of this, it means that the protein or the hormones here is a peptide hormones. So that is why it binds. So it binds to the receptor on the surface of the cells. So once it binds, then the GDP, that is guanine diphosphate, will now bind to, so now converted to GTP, that is guanine triphosphate. So the GTP will now activate an enzyme called adenylyl cyclase. Adenylyl cyclase is an enzyme that converts ATP to CAMP, and then the CAMP will now activate protein kinases, which triggers a lot of other downstream biochemical processes, which at the end make the physiological response by the hormones take place. So these interactions lead to physiological changes that have to maintain homeostasis. So once the receptor binds the hormones, a series of biochemical reactions will be activated. Then the physiological changes such as growth, the maintenance of homeostasis will now take place. So ladies and gentlemen, at this point, this is actually some of the basics information that you need to get about hormones. So the next thing is actually feedback mechanism. What is feedback mechanism? A hormones or hormonal regulation often involves in feedback mechanisms to maintain balance. So we have negative feedback mechanism. So negative feedback reduces the output of the process once the desired level is achieved. Assuming now you produce something like, for example, adrenaline. Adrenaline is actually a hormone that produced especially during stress, fight and flight hormones. So once the hormones is produced and it elicits its desired functions, or it carried out the physiological process. So it means that once it done this action, then it is actually the work of the negative feedback to bring down the body to the normal states. But for the positive feedback mechanism, it amplifies a process leading to a greater response until a specific event occurs. Like, for example, during birth, a lady or a mother, a pregnant woman usually needs to actually give birth to the child during the labor. So as the mother trying to push off the child, a lot of hormones are produced like oxytocin, so that it will control the contraction and the relaxation of the uterus for her to actually give birth to the baby softly. So this is actually to understand that at this point, the oxytocin will keep reproducing. It will keep amplifying the contraction and the relaxation of the uterus until when the child is successfully delivered. So this is actually a positive feedback mechanism. So once the child is delivered, then the event will now actually come back to its normal states. So this is actually in the case of positive and the negative feedback. The first one is actually the amplification process, while the other one is to reduce the output of the process once the desired level is achieved. So you see, negative feedback maintain homeostasis, where positive feedback drive the system away from equilibrium. So positive feedback mechanisms maintain the balanced amount of substances, where negative feedback restrict them. So these are actually some of the basic differences that you should understand in the case of feedback mechanism. So the next thing is actually the role of hypothalamus in the nervous system. So we should get that. So the hypothalamus is one of these center for the control of most of the endocrine gland, and it exerts effect through the pituitary gland. So the major functions of this hypothalamus is actually a critical brain region that links the nervous system and the endocrine system. So that is the major role of the hypothalamus. It's trying to link, it associates nervous system and endocrine system, and it reduces releasing and inhibiting hormones that control the pituitary gland activity. Like, for example, this hypothalamus can also have, or it's actually very important in producing some two key hormones. These key hormones that are produced by the pituitary gland include number one, that is oxytocin. So oxytocin is one of the hormones that is produced. Oxytocin is one of the hormones that is produced by the hypothalamus, and also vasopressin. Vasopressin. So vasopressin and pituitary gland are actually hormones that are and oxytocin are the two hormones produced by the hypothalamus. And what is the major functions of oxytocin? The major functions of oxytocin, one, we call it love hormones. If you are in love with someone and you have the feelings of the love, is due to oxytocin. The feelings of love between the mother and a child is due to oxytocin. The feelings of love between brother and sister is due to oxytocin. And more importantly, this oxytocin is also very important in contraction and the relaxation of the uterus, especially during childbirth, and it causes the mammary gland to respond to stimulus of sucking. So remember, if you have a child and you are not with the child and it's somewhere, if the child is crying, sometimes you feel it. Why is it that? Because there is this hormones oxytocin. And then the next one is vasopressin. So vasopressin it causes a raise in blood pressure in tissues under stress condition and helps the body to withstand such condition. So when you are under pressure or when you are under stress, usually your blood pressure usually goes high. So it is actually the work of vasopressin, which is actually one of the hormones secreted by the hypothalamus. So you should get this, ladies and gentlemen. Vasopressin and oxytocin, they are two hormones that are released by the pituitary, by the hypothalamus. So what is actually some of the background information related to this oxytocin? What does it do? So one, it's involved in regulating homeostasis and also respond to stressors. So like, for example, one of the background, let's look at it. One of the importance of hypothalamus is that it has important role in homeostasis. Part of the diencephalon located between the two cerebral hemispheres. So that is the location where it found. And the major function, it regulates bodily processes. What are the bodily processes that are controlled by hypothalamus? It controls thirst and water intake, hunger and food intake, autonomic nervous system, biological circadian rhythms, body temperature, like body pressure, breastfeeding, learning and memory, sexual drive, emotional expression. All these are actually work of the hypothalamus. It also produces hormones. That is why we also mention them. The hormones produced by the hypothalamus include oxytocin and vasopressin. More importantly, the disorders that are actually can affect the hypothalamus, it can be genetic conditions like Kallmann syndrome, Prader-Willi syndrome. We have also hypothalamic obesity, diabetes insipidus. These are actually some of the diseases that are associated with the disorders of hypothalamus. So what are the hormones? What are some of the hormones that are produced by this hypothalamus? We have thyroid releasing hormones. We have corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH. We have gonadotropin releasing hormones. We have growth hormones releasing hormones. We have somatotropin, dopamine. We have vasopressin/antidiuretic hormones. We have oxytocin. So apart from oxytocin, vasopressin, they also release thyroid. They also release thyrotropin releasing hormones. They also releases CRH, human gonadotropin releasing hormones. It also secretes growth hormones, dopamine, and somatotropin. All these are the hormones that are released by the hypothalamus. So this is actually the role of the hypothalamus in endocrine system and the nervous system. So now we are going back to actually the one of the gland, which is pituitary gland. And don't forget that, ladies and gentlemen, from the beginning of this, I told you that pituitary gland is divided into two. So the often term we also often term that usually call this pituitary gland is called a master gland. So the pituitary gland regulates several endocrine functions. It secretes hormones that influence growth, metabolism, and reproductive functions. So disorders of pituitary gland can lead to significant hormonal imbalance in the body. So this is actually some of the hormones that actually control or that linked with the work of the pituitary gland, which is also master gland. So I think you can go back and see from the first, I think the third slide, I talk about the different types of pituitary gland, posterior and the anterior pituitary gland. The hormones produced by for anterior pituitary gland include FSH, LH, prolactin, TSH, and ACTH. For the posterior, there is growth hormones, oxytocin, and ADH. Those ones are the hormones that are produced by the posterior pituitary gland. So what are actually hormones? Why is it that it is called master gland? Because it controls all the activities of the other hormones. Because if it doesn't work, or if actually it has some issues or problem, then there are some of the hormones that cannot be produced. Some of these hormones include like growth hormones, insulin, testosterone, adrenaline, releasing hormones. All these are the hormones that are produced by the body, and they are controlled by the activity of the master gland, which is pituitary gland. So I think it is important. So let's see in the pituitary gland, we said that it's divided into two. So starting with the anterior pituitary gland. So one of the hormones produced by the anterior pituitary gland, it produces one. I think let me just look at these hormones and talk about them one after the other. Some of the hormones that are produced by the anterior pituitary gland, number one, we have growth hormones. We have growth hormones. And these growth hormones is called somatotropin growth hormones. We call it somatotropin. Somatotropin. So this is actually the growth hormones that can be produced by the anterior pituitary gland, and it is secreted throughout life and stimulate growth by encouraging protein metabolism. So excessive production during early life leads to gigantism of the body. So we should understand this is one of the hormones that usually produce in our body, and especially during our early life. These hormones is the hormones that produce that control our growth. You see that someone can grow with bigger body size, while some can grow with a small, bigger body or with a small body size. So this is actually different on the somatotropin. So the more you produce the hormones, the more you are going to have big body, and the lower it is, the lower you are going to have a small body. So if you produce these hormones in higher concentration, so it actually leads to what you call gigantism. If later the abnormal development of the hand, feet, just easily called acromegaly under secretion result in dwarfism. So you see, if you produce these hormones in small amount, it leads to dwarfism. That's why you can see some people are dwarf, and it's because they are actually producing these hormones in a smaller amount. So then the next hormones produced by this anterior pituitary gland is thyrotropic hormones. Thyrotropic hormones called thyrotropin. It is actually hormones that stimulate thyroid secretion and production of thyroxine. So I said the next one is thyrotropic hormone or thyrotropin. The next one is thyrotropic. We call it thyrotropic hormones. What these thyrotropic hormones does, it stimulates thyroid excretion and production of thyroxine. So now that we have thyroxine or thyroid gland, so these thyrotropic hormones is the hormones that stimulate thyroid gland to secrete hormones thyroxine. And then we have adrenocorticotropic hormones, which stimulate production of three types of hormones known as corticosteroid hormones. So we have adrenocorticotropic hormones, which actually stimulate the production of three types of hormones. Then we have also follicle stimulating hormones, which stimulate the development of ova and spermatozoa in gonads. Ladies and gentlemen, get it right? We have adrenocorticotropic hormones. You can check it from your materials or from your notes. The name of the hormones, we have adrenocorticotropic hormones. The major functions is actually help to stimulate three corticosteroid hormones. Then we have follicle stimulating hormones. It stimulates the production of ova, that is the egg in ladies, and also spermatozoa in gonad, that is in males. We produce sperm and we produce egg. Females produce egg while men produce sperm. So the production of egg and sperm in humans are controlled by follicle stimulating hormones. We also have luteotropic hormones, which affect focus luteum, stimulating the production of progesterone, especially during pregnancy. So luteinizing hormones is actually a hormones that stimulate progesterone production in the corpus luteum. You know that during pregnancy usually take about 9 months with some days. So the pregnancy is maintained by the progesterone, and that progesterone is one of the hormones that actually be produced as a result of the action of luteinizing hormones. We also have interstitial cell stimulating hormones, or we also call luteinizing hormones. This causes the release of ova from the ovary. So usually, especially during sexual intercourse, there is also for the fertilization to take place, egg and sperm cells must actually come together and then fertilization will take place. So generally, most of the eggs are stored in the ovary. So if the work of interstitial cell stimulating hormones or luteinizing hormones to cause the ovary or to force the ovary to release the egg or to release the ova. Then we have prolactin. Prolactin is the activity of the corpus luteum of the ovary and plays a role in male production in the mammary gland. So generally, during pregnancy, progesterone is produced to maintain the pregnancy, and once the baby is delivered, then the next line of action is prolactin, which actually one of the important hormones that help in milk production in the mammary gland. So you see, this is actually some of the hormones and their functions. Number one, we said we have growth hormones. It produces growth hormones. It produces thyrotropic hormones, which stimulate thyroxine production. There is also adrenocorticotropic hormones to stimulate the production of three corticosteroid hormones. These corticosteroid hormones, it can be human gonadotropic hormones. It can be adrenocorticotropic hormones. All these are the corticosteroid hormones that are stimulated by adrenal. We have luteinizing hormones, we have prolactin, so all of them, they have their functions. Then the next one is actually posterior pituitary gland. So the posterior pituitary gland produces two hormones. These two hormones include antidiuretic hormones, which is vasopressin and oxytocin. Both these hormones are made by the neurons in the hypothalamus and migrate to the axons of the neurons to posterior pituitary gland where they are armored. So what is the major functions of antidiuretic hormones? It promotes reabsorption of water. It promotes reabsorption of water. So it's actually very, very important, especially in the diabetes management. Then the next one is oxytocin. So oxytocin is actually one of the hormones. So the actual release of milk from the mammary gland and also the contraction of the uterus during and after childbirth is actually controlled by this oxytocin. It is at times administered to induce or speed up labor, especially during pregnancy. So this is actually the thyroid gland. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, this thyroid gland plays a lot of roles in the biological system. So it produces about seven hormones, somatotrophin, thyrotropic hormones, adrenocorticotropic hormones, follicle stimulating hormones, luteinizing hormones, interstitial stimulating hormones, and prolactin. These are the seven hormones that are produced by the pituitary gland. And this is also part of what we are going to discuss. So then the next one, apart from the pituitary gland, we have also another gland, which is actually a thyroid gland. So a thyroid gland produces hormones like thyroxine, which regulate metabolism. So thyroxine is one of the major hormones that is produced or that are produced by the thyroid gland. And this thyroxine is actually playing, it actually regulates the basic rate of metabolism as well as maturation in mammals. So this is actually the work of these hormones. It regulates the basic metabolism or the basic rate of metabolism that take place in our body and as well as maturation. So thyroid hormones are essential for growth and development, particularly in children. Imbalance in thyroid hormones can lead to conditions such as hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. So when we said hyper or hypothyroidism is actually it's usually in children, which causes the retardation of physical and mental development. We call the condition called cretinism. Cretinism. They call it cretinism. Cretinism. Cretinism is called hypothyroidism and it usually causes the retardation of physical and the mental development in child and in adults where is generally sluggish metabolism occur. So you see it affects both child and adult and it is actually caused as a result of low concentration or low production of these thyroid hormones, and that is why it's called hypothyroidism. Hypothyroidism is often in children, while in adult it's called sluggish metabolism, which is also known as mesoedema. Then in the case of hyperthyroidism, that is where the hormones are produced in higher concentration. So in the hyperthyroidism, it causes high metabolic rate, restlessness, feverish activity, rapid heartbeat, and generally wasting of the body. So it causes wasting of the body. It also leads to high metabolic rates, restlessness, as well as the rapid heartbeats. So a condition described as exophthalmic goiter results from deficiency of iodine in the diet. So remember, ladies and gentlemen, these hormones is actually usually work in combined from or with the help of iodine. So if there is actually low iodine, it can actually lead to goiter. So the eyeballs constitute thyroid enlarge, e.g. So treatment was formerly by surgery, but not drugs. No, but now drugs can be used. So you see, in the case of thyroid hormones, we have actually four classes of thyroid hormones. We have tetraiodothyronine, we have triiodothyronine, we have triiodothyronine. So you see, we have the tetraiodothyronine. It means that at carbon 3355, there are this iodine. It means that for the T3 at carbon 3, 3, and 5, there is iodine. In the case of T3 or reverse T3, we have it at carbon 3, and we have 2 of them at carbon 5. That is why it's 3, 5, 5 triiodine. So it means that iodine is needed for you to have a complete functional thyroid hormones. So if there is a problem with deficiency of this iodine, it means that there are going to be a deficiency of iodine, and that leads to goiter. And the treatment of this goiter is usually surgery, but now people are using drugs to cure the disease. So this is actually the role of thyroid hormones in the nerve. This is actually role of thyroid gland in hormonal production. So then the next one is actually adrenal glands. Adrenal gland. So adrenal gland is actually where a hormones called epinephrine or adrenaline produced. So adrenaline and adrenaline are produced there. So the adrenal gland produce hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline in response to stress. So usually when we are under stress, these are the two major hormones that are produced in our body. And these two major hormones include. So these are the two major hormones that usually produce in the body under stress condition, cortisol and adrenaline. So cortisol helps to regulate metabolism and immune response, while adrenaline prepares the body for fight or flight. So adrenaline is one of the several hormones that is produced by the adrenal gland. So adrenaline release is associated with anger. So it's associated with anger, excitement, fear, and tension. So when you are under anger, excitement, fear, or tension, so there is a likelihood that you are going to release the adrenaline. And it prefers an animal for fights or flights, implying excessive muscular effort. So that is why whenever you produce this adrenaline, you are going to get a lot of energy, because the adrenaline will actually involve in activating most of the energy generating pathways. So you get enough energy. You can even get an energy that you even surprise where you usually have that energy. So it makes a threatened animal more dangerous to tackle. So adrenaline brings about this secretion by increasing muscle tone, metabolism of sugar and serum fatty acid, and the conversion of glycogen to glucose. So usually when this adrenaline are produced, so it activates most of the energy pathway. Like for example, the muscle tone. The muscle tone increase. And of course, the metabolism of sugar and serum fatty acid, because the sugar and the fatty acid, they are involving energy generation in the body. So because you need that energy when adrenaline is produced, so that is why you experience increase in muscle tone, because once you produce enough energy from the sugar and the serum fatty acids, and also the conversion of glycogen to glucose, the glucose, the sugar, and the adrenaline, their major role is to produce energy, and that increase in energy will increase the muscle tone in the body. So this is actually what happened when a lot of adrenaline or high concentration of adrenaline are produced. Increase in muscle tone, there will be an increase in metabolism of fatty acids. There will be an increase in metabolism of sugar. There is also going to be an increase in conversion of glycogen to glucose. So therefore, there will be an increase in metabolic and heart rate, and increased depth of breathing, fever, the animal for emergency. Then there is also no epinephrine or no adrenaline. There is also a precursor of adrenaline, but it is secreted as a separate hormones during activity rather than in anticipation of it. And it is released in response to general stress. So cortisol, adrenaline, no epinephrine, they are produced there. So you see, first, this is the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland secrete adrenocorticotropic hormones, AGH, and this ADH will now these hormones, you see it here, will now activate adrenal gland to release this adrenaline and cortisol under stress. So it means that under stress, adrenocorticotropic hormones is usually activated. So once adrenaline, cortisol are released, then there will be a fast breathing. So there will be an increase in heart rate. And there's also an increase in the conversion of glycogen to glucose, as I mentioned. There will be an increase in blood pressure. There will be internal vision. There will be an acceleration of heart rate. There will be slow digestion. Digestion will slow down and there will be sweating. So this is what happened when adrenaline and cortisol are released by the body. So this is actually for the adrenal hormones. Then the next one is actually a pancreas. A pancreas, like for example, insulin and glucagon are the key hormones produced by the pancreas. And the major role, insulin usually lowers blood sugar levels by facilitating the uptake of glucose into the cell. And then glucagon, it rises. If your blood glucose level is low, so it is actually the work of the glucagon to raise the blood sugar so that it is actually maintained within the normal range. And when the blood glucose level is very high, and it is actually the work of the insulin to lower the blood glucose levels to actually become or to be within the normal range. So that is actually very important. So this is what they do. One increases the blood sugar and the other one reduces the blood sugar. Then hormones and growth. So there are actually growth hormones like somatotrophin, which is released by the pituitary gland. I think we have talked about that. And their major role is to stimulate growth in tissues and promote the synthesis of protein. And deficiency in growth hormones can lead to growth disorder in children. And I think we mentioned that when we talk about the deficiency of growth hormones, it leads to dwarfism. And you see, this is the neurosecretory cells. And this is actually the different neurotransmitters. So then, hormones and reproduction. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, there is something very important that I didn't mention. That is thymus gland. A thymus gland produces a hormones. So I didn't mention it. The thymus gland produces a hormone called thymosin, and the major function of thymosin is to stimulate multiplication of lymphocytes in lymphatic glands. So the lymphocytes is one of the very important hormones. So the lymphocyte is one of the very important cells in the body which actually help us in fighting infections. In fact, the lymphocytes are divided into two. We have T lymphocyte and B lymphocyte, and each of these, they have their specific roles in the body. So then, now, we also have, apart from that, we also have kidney, because here in these slides, I didn't mention them. So apart from that, we also have kidney. So kidney also is one of the organs that involve in hormonal system. So kidney produces a hormone called erythropoietin, erythropoietin. And the major functions of this erythropoietin is to stimulate red blood cell production. So the major work of erythropoietin is stimulate red blood cell production, and it's produced by the kidney. And then the next one is also, apart from that, there is also another hormones. Yeah, so, and very importantly, this stimulation of the red blood cell production, it's actually takes place in the bone marrow. So you know that it's the bone marrow that produces red blood cells, but it's actually with the help of these hormones, erythropoietin. And then there is also angiotensin. Angiotensin is also one of the hormones that control the level of blood and brings about a decrease in blood pressure. So these actually two important hormones that are secreted by the kidney. We have erythropoietin and we have angiotensin. Then the next one is placenta. What is the work of the placenta? Placenta produces chorionic gonadotropin, estrogen, and progesterone. This is actually the two hormones that are sorry, these are actually some of the hormones that are produced by the placenta. And these hormones, they are very important in the growth of the uterus and the mammary gland after ovarian and luteal secretions are stopped. And it also produces androsterone and testosterone, which together stimulate spermatogenesis and control activity of seminal vesicles and prostate gland. So placenta also produces hormones. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, there is also ovaries. Ovaries in females, they produce a progesterone. And the major functions of the progesterone is actually a hormones that control or that actually important in the implantation of the embryo and helps to maintain pregnancy by inhibiting further ovulation and consequently the next oestrous cycle. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, when you are pregnant, you don't ovulate. That is why there is no multiple pregnancy. So once you are pregnant, once you are impregnated, you are not going to longer, or you are no longer going to produce any egg. So even if there is 1,000 sex, there will be no other egg that will be used for the fertilization to have another pregnancy. So the maintenance of the pregnancy is by the progesterone, and it's very important in implantation of embryo. Why is it that some pregnant women can easily abort or can easily be involved in abortion? A low secretion of this progesterone can also lead to that. Then we also have female body. So female body produces melatonin, which actually brings about maturation of gonad and stimulate gonadotropin releasing factors in the hypothalamus, setting the whole sexual cycle in action. So ladies and gentlemen, this is what I wanted us to understand. These are the different organs that we have that involve in producing hormones. You see, we said we have pancreas, we have kidney. Kidney produces erythropoietin and angiotensin. So don't forget about that. Placenta produce chorionic gonadotropin, estrogen, and progesterone. Also, ovaries produces progesterone. And then, very importantly, there is also female body, which also produces melatonin. Then we have talked about pancreas, which produces insulin and glucagon. Then we also have adrenal cortex, which actually produces aldosterone, a mineral or corticoid, which promotes reabsorption of sodium ion. So adrenal cortex also produces hormones, and the hormones is aldosterone, which actually very important in the absorption of sodium ions. So now, hormones and growth. We talk about this, then the next thing is hormones and reproduction. So hormones such as estrogen and testosterone that play a significant roles in reproductive health and regulate sexual development, menstrual cycles, and fertility. So let me just actually shout here, ladies and gentlemen. The higher the concentration of these hormones in your body, the more your sexual desire. Some have low sexual drive because they have low concentration of estrogen and testosterone. So the more you produce them, the more you have your sexual desire. So some people's actually, what happened to them is that they have low erection because they have low estrogen. Some people really have high sexual desire because they have high concentration of the testosterone in them. And also in the case of women, when the estrogen is high, they will have high sexual desire. When the estrogen is low, they are going to have low sexual desire. But very importantly, we should know that these hormones are found both in men and women. but it's just the concentration that varies. I, as a man, I have both estrogen and testosterone. So if the estrogen concentration is high, so that is why you are female. But the concentration of testosterone is going to be very low. But in the case of men, they have estrogen, but the concentration is very low, but the testosterone is very high, and that is why they are men. But in a situation whereby both estrogen and testosterone have equal concentration, that's where we have bisexual human. The human will have both sex and will have both male and female sex organs. So hormonal imbalance can lead to reproductive issues in both men and women. So you see here, this is how it happens. We have the first hormones, we have gonadotropic hormones, and these gonadotropin hormones stimulate pituitary gland to release follicle-stimulating hormones, which causes follicles to mature. And once the follicles is mature, then the ovary will now release an egg. So as a result of that, the estrogen will slow follicle-stimulating hormones and start luteinizing hormones. And the major functions of luteinizing hormones, it is an enzyme, if you didn't forget, is actually causes the release of ova, that is the release of egg. So first, the follicles will be actually activated, which causes the follicles to mature. And once the follicles is mature, then the concentration of the follicles will go high, low. And then the estrogen, of course, it's the estrogen that will be activated. So once the estrogen is activated, then the follicle-stimulating hormones will be slow, and then the luteinizing hormones will start, so that to activate the release of ova, that is egg from the ovary. So that is where we have ovulation. So it is actually luteinizing hormones that causes ovulation. And then the progesterone after the ovulation will now slow luteinizing hormones, so that once progesterone is actually produced, it means that the pregnancy is established. So if the pregnancy is established, then there is no more ovulation. So that is why the luteinizing hormones will go low. And this progesterone is usually produced by corpus luteum. And then the estrogen and progesterone levels will fall, leading up to menstruation. If the pregnancy is actually been delivered, if there is no baby or the baby is delivered, so the estrogen and progesterone levels will now fall. And once it is fall, that is when the menstruation will start. And that is why in most cases, when ladies are under menstruation, their sexual desire go very low, because the estrogen, which is actually one of the major hormones that control the sexual character, the concentration goes low, and progesterone also goes low. So progesterone is always established when there is pregnancy. So you see, these hormones, gonadotropin hormones, is the first hormones that is activated during the sexual intercourse or in the reproductive cycles in women. So once it is produced, then the pituitary gland will now activate the release of follicle-stimulating hormones, and the follicle-stimulating hormones will causes the follicles to mature. Follicles is where we have the egg. So once the follicles is mature, then the estrogen will now be produced. And that estrogen will now cause the ladies or the women to have high sexual desire. And that is why in most cases, when ladies actually finish their menstrual cycle, their sexual desire usually go high because of the high concentration of estrogen. And once that happens, then the follicle stimulating hormones will now be slow. Therefore, it means the maturation of the follicles or the follicles will now decreases. So therefore, there will be no more maturation. So you already have a matured egg there. Then the next thing is luteinizing hormones, which causes that mature egg to release from the ovary to the uterus. So after ovulation, when there is a pregnancy, when the egg is fertilized in the uterus, then the next thing is actually the progesterone will be produced. And once the progesterone is produced, then the next thing is to implant the embryo produced to the uterus. And then at the same time, the corpus luteum that produces the progesterone will also keep the progesterone level concentration remain. This will now slow luteinizing hormones. And while luteinizing hormones is slow, it means no more ovulation. So the pregnancy will maintain. So if there is no ovulation after every pregnancy, it means that there will be no chances of multiple pregnancy. And once the baby is delivered, it means that the concentration of estrogen and progesterone will go low, especially during the menstruation cycle. So this is what I want us to understand, ladies and gentlemen, at this point. So hormonal coordination in stress response. The body responds to stress through hormonal pathways involving the adrenal gland. So stress hormones prefer the body to handle immediate challenges or threats. So that's why we produce adrenaline and cortisol. They are the hormones that help us to actually increase our heartbeat, increase our energy, sweating, also increase dilation of bronchi. I will get enough energy so that we can actually prepare our body to handle any kind of immediate challenges. Your eyes will open up. So what is the role of hormones in metabolism? So we mentioned that insulin, glucagon are responsible for controlling sugar level. The thyroid hormones control the basic metabolic pathways, and it helps regulate energy production, storage, and utilization in the body. So metabolic disorders are often arise from hormonal imbalances. So if there is a hormonal imbalances, like for example, diabetes is a metabolic disorder. So the imbalances in insulin and glucagon can lead to such diseases. So what are those hormonal disorders? Hormonal disorders can result from overproduction or underproduction of the hormones. So when hormones are overproduced or underproduced, there is a problem. So such examples of the hormonal disorder include diabetes, thyroid diseases, and adrenal insufficiency. So treatment often involves hormonal replacement or medication to restore balance. So that is why someone that is suffering with diabetes type 1, if you inject him with insulin, then you can actually treat the disease from there. So hormonal coordination and aging. Hormonal changes are a natural part of aging affecting various bodily functions. So decreased hormonal levels can lead to symptoms like fatigue, weight gain, and mood changes. So understanding age-related hormonal shifts can improve human health management in older adults. So that is why it is very important, ladies and gentlemen, to understand the correlation of hormonal coordination and aging. Because as we age, there are some hormones that we produce them in lower concentration. And there are even some hormones that even if we produce them, but because of the receptors in aged individuals, it undergoes wearing and tearing, there will not be binding. But if the binding is taking place, but there is no actually proper hormonal functions that will take place, there will no proper hormonal response. So that's what we understand. We need to understand that as we age, there are a lot of things that will actually come off. So advances in hormonal research. So undergoing research in uncovering new roles of hormones and their impact on health is important. Studies on hormonal therapies are exploring treatment for various conditions. So there are a lot of hormonal therapies. If you understand that someone is actually having some diseases, then proper diagnosis is important. So in conclusion, hormonal coordination is essential for maintaining overall health and balance in the body. So understanding the roles of different hormones aids in recognizing and managing disorders. So continued research is critical for developing new therapies and improving health outcomes. So ladies and gentlemen, this is where we are going to stop, and I hope this video will be very interesting to all of you. Take your time and watch this video from beginning to the end. I'm happy, I knew that you will be happy with the video and you will actually learn a lot. So while watching this video, also take your textbooks and reading it and watching the videos at the same time. Thank you and see you next.